Hello and welcome back to Kim Reads. So we're going to read the Kit stories from American Girl. And here's Kit's friends and family. Anyway, the first one is called Meet Kit. Chapter 1. Good news. Click, clack, clackety. Kit Kitteridge smiled as she typed. She loved the sound the typewriter keys made as they struck the paper and the ping of the bell when she got to the end of the line. She loved the inky smell of the typewriter ribbon and the way the black letters looked as they marched across the page, telling the story the way she wanted it to be told. It was a hot afternoon in August. Kit and her best friend Ruthie, they were in Kit's room writing a newspaper for Kit's dad. Kit was not a very good typist. She only used her 2 pointer fingers, and she made a lot of mistakes, which she had to XXX out. But Dad never minded. Every night, when he came home from work, he gave Kit the real newspaper so she could read the headlines and the baseball scores and the funnies. He was always very pleased when Kit gave him one of her newspapers in return. Kit finished the paragraph she was typing. "Read me what we have so far," said Ruthie. Kit cleared her throat and read. "That's good," said Ruthie when Kit finished reading. "I like it." "Me too," said Kit, "but what should we write about now?" "Write about Charlie and the cookies," said Ruthie. Charlie was Kit's brother, who was 16. Kit thought for a moment, then she typed. Ruthie looked over Kit's shoulder and giggled as she wrote Kit had written. "Now what?" she asked. Kit picked up a pencil and put it behind her ear so that she looked like a newspaper reporter. "Well," she said, "we can write about how hot it is." Ruthie nodded quickly at first, then slower and slower. Finally, she let her chin fall to her chest, closing her eyes and pretended to snore. "You're right," said Kit. "Weather's boring. There aren't any people in it. This is supposed to be a newspaper, not a snooze paper." "You're right how your mother redecorated your room," Ruthie said. "I think it's as pretty as a princess room, don't you?" Answered Kit with a crooked smile. "It's okay, it's just a little too pink for me. I'd rather be asleep in the treehouse like Robin Hood." Ruthie shook her head. "You're crazy," she said. "Yep," said Kit cheerfully. She knew Ruthie was right, of course. Her room was pretty. Mother had redecorated for her earlier that summer as a surprise. And as with everything Mother did, it was lovely. Kit's room was painted pale pink with white trim. There was a canopy bed as high and white and fluffy as a cloud, and dressing table with a lacy skirt around it. The desk was white and spiny-legged. It looked too delicate to hold the big black typewriter that crouched on it. Mother had asked Kit to keep the typewriter in the closet, please, and take it out only when she used it. But Kit always forgot to put the typewriter away. Besides, she used it a lot. The typewriter ended up being on her desk all the time, even though it looked out of place in the frilly room. Kit squirmed on the poofy stool that had replaced her old swivel chair. She believed in telling the truth straight out, but so far she had told Mother that she felt out of place in the frilly room as the typewriter looked. Mother was so pleased with all the lacy vagueness and so sure the room was a girl's dream. "Which it probably is," Kit admitted to herself, "just not mine." "The redecorating story is no good because Dad knows all about it," she said to Ruthie. "It's not new." Kit sighed. "I wish something would happen around here, some dramatic change. That way we'd have a headline that would really grab Dad's attention." "Like the real newspaper," said Ruthie. "Exactly," said Kit. "I don't know," said Ruthie. "When my parents read the headlines these days, they get worried. The news is always about the Depression, and it's always bad. I don't think we want our paper to be like that." "No," said Kit, "we want good news." She knew there hadn't been good news in the real newspapers for a long time. The whole country was in a mess because of the Depression. Dad had explained it to her. About 3 years ago, people got nervous about their money and stopped buying as many things as they used to, so some stores closed down. The people who worked in those stores lost their jobs. Then the factories that made those things, the stores used to have to close down, so the factory workers lost their jobs too. Pretty soon, the people who lost their jobs had no money to pay the doctors or house painters or music teachers, so those people got poorer too. Kit was glad that her dad still had his job at his car dealership. She knew Ruthie knew kids at school whose fathers had lost their jobs. They'd seen fathers selling apples on street corners, trying to earn a few cents a day. Some kids had disappeared from school because their families didn't have enough money to pay the rent anymore, and they had to move. Dad said the Depression was like a terrible slippery hole. Once you fell in, it was almost impossible to get out. Kit knew that the Depression was getting worse all the time because the newspaper headlines said so almost every night. But inside Kit's house, no dramatic changes worth a headline seemed to be happening. The girls were about to give up on finding any news, good or bad, when Charlie popped his head in the door. "Hey girls," he said, "Mother's Garden Club's here. You better get downstairs quick if you want anything to eat. I saw Mrs. Culver already diving headfirst in the nut dish." "Thanks for telling us, Charlie," said Kit. "Oh boy," said Ruthie, "maybe there'll be some cake for us." "Maybe there'll be some news for us," said Kit. She grabbed her notepad and took the pencil from behind her ear. "Come on." Kit and Ruthie thundered downstairs. They slowed their steps in the hallway so that they wouldn't sound, as Mother always said, like a herd of stampeding elephants. Mother liked things to be just so when the garden club ladies came. She brought out all her best crystal, china, silver, and linen and arranged her most beautiful plants on the terrace when the ladies met. Kit could hear the ladies' voices and clink of their iced tea glasses on the terrace below. Above all the other voices, Kit heard Mrs. Wolf complimenting Mother. "Margaret," Mrs. Wolf was saying, "your sponge cake is perfection." "Mine is just that, a sponge." Mrs. Wolf hooted at her own joke before she went on. "Please give me a recipe." "I'd be glad to," said Mother, just as Kit and Ruthie stepped out on the terrace. Mother looked as cool and slender as a mint leaf in her pale green dress. Kit wanted to fling herself at Mother and hug her, but she held back. Her fingers had typewriter ink on them. It would never do to leave ink stains on Mother's perfect green dress. Mother smiled when she saw the girls. Then she turned to her guests and said, "Ladies, you remember Ruth and Smithens and my daughter Kit, don't you?" "Yes, of course," said the ladies. "Hello, girls." "Hello," said Kit and Ruthie politely. Do help yourselves to some refreshments, girls," said Mother. "We will," said Kit and Ruthie, smiling broadly. The girls filled their plates and retreated to a corner behind a potted plant to enjoy their feast and observe the ladies. At first, the ladies discussed garden club business, such as how to get rid of bugs, slugs, and other garden pests. It was pretty boring. Although the girls did get giggly when Mrs. Wilmore said she was just beside herself when she had spocks on her phlox. Then the talk moved on who was going to weed the garden bed of the hospital, which the garden club ladies took turns doing. "I believe it is my turn," said Mrs. Howard, "but I'm afraid I won't be able to weed this month. In fact," she hesitated and blinking her big round eyes, "I'm afraid I won't be able to be part of the garden club anymore." Kit and Ruthie looked at each other and raised their eyebrows. This sounded interesting. Why would Mrs. Howard be quitting the garden club? Kit leaned forward so that she could hear better. There may be a story in this for our newspaper, she thought. All the ladies murmured that they were sorry, and Mother said, "Oh, Louise, that's too bad." "Well," said Mrs. Howard, "I'm moving to Chicago. My husband is already there, and so my son Sterling and I are going to join him. He's pursuing a business opportunity." "All right," said the ladies brightly. They all knew what that meant. Kit did too. It meant that Mr. Howard had gone to Chicago to look for a job. Everyone knew that Mr. Howard had not had a job for 2 years, ever since the company he worked for here in Cincinnati had gone out of business. Where will you live in Chicago? A lady asked. I'm not sure yet, said Mrs. Howard, blinking again. Mr. Howard hasn't settled anywhere. We'll be hither, thither, and yon for a while. The ladies smiled, but Kit saw little lines of concern on their faces. The whole thing sounded pretty fishy to Kit. If the Howards have no place to live in Chicago, why are they leaving their house in Cincinnati? She wondered. Then suddenly it dawned on her. The Howards couldn't stay in their house. They didn't have the money anymore. And Mr. Howard didn't have a job or a place for them to live in Chicago either. That was the truth. Kit was sure of it. She was pretty sure that all the ladies knew it too, but no one would say it out loud. There was an awkward silence. Then Mother spoke up and made everything better. I have a marvelous idea, Louise, she said to Mrs. Howard. We would love if you and dear Sterling would stay in our guest room until your husband is settled in Chicago and sends for you. Sterling is about Kit's age. I'm sure they'll get along beautifully. Ruthie nudged Kit, but Kit held her finger to her lips to signal Ruthie not to say anything. The ladies turned to Mrs. Howard, waiting anxiously for her answer to Mother's invitation. Well, said Mrs. Howard slowly, if you're sure it isn't too much trouble, Sterling and I would love to stay. Thank you, Margaret. Then it's all settled then, said Mother calmly. All the ladies brightened up, as if the cloud had blown away. Kit started scribbling notes on her notepad, and Ruthie whispered to who's this boy Sterling? Kit shrugged. He's Mrs. Howard's son, I guess. She said, I haven't met him. You will, said Ruthie. He's going to be living in your house. Looks like it, said Kit. She liked the idea. Boys were always up to something. Sterling was sure to be a good source of stories for a newspaper for Dad. It would be nice to have a boy around, especially after Charlie left for college. She and Sterling could play catch together. They could talk about the Cincinnati Reds team, which Kit loved and Ruthie quite frankly didn't care about. And Sterling could join in when she and Ruthie act out stories from books they read. Kit grinned at Ruthie. When we play Robin Hood, Sterling can be the sheriff of Nottingham, she said. Boys like to be the bad guy. Ruthie had a big bite of cake in her mouth. She swallowed and grinned back at Kit. Well, she said, you may never know. Sterling might rather be Prince Charming and perform good deeds. He's already performed one good deed, said Kit. What? Said Ruthie. Come on, said Kit, I'll show you. The two girls slipped back in the house and ran upstairs to Kit's room. Kit stood in front of her typewriter. Sterling's given us a headline, she said to Ruthie. Look. Kit typed it in capital letters. And that's the end of that chapter. See you later.